on an airplane that's been hijacked.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Oh my Lord!
Ladies and gentlemen, from Madison Square Garden in New York City, Michael Jackson, 30th anniversary celebration.
On the evening of September 10, 2001, Michael Jackson was performing in a sold-out Madison Square Garden in New York. In the early hours of the night, Michael was still awake in his New York hotel room. The city outside was quiet, suspended in the fragile, pre-dawn stillness. Inside, time stretched. A long, intimate conversation with his mother and siblings. They finally left around 3 a.m. Nothing about that night felt extraordinary. No sense of danger, just family, fatigue, and the slow drift towards sleep. Michael was supposed to be at a morning meeting inside the World Trade Center, high up near the top of one of the Twin Towers. He was supposed to be there to discuss his upcoming album, Invincible, but when morning came, the King of Pop overslept. Minutes passed, then more, when the first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. Michael was reportedly still at his suite at the Palace Hotel. Upon calling to check on him, his mother learned of his close call. In the story's most iconic line, Michael told her,
"Mother, I am okay, thanks to you. You kept me up talking so late that I overslept and missed my appointment."
Years later, his brother Jermaine Jackson would write about that moment with quiet disbelief. None of them had known how close it was. Not until after. It wasn't a heroic escape or a dramatic decision, and in the shadow of that morning, that small delay became the thin line between ordinary life and unimaginable loss. There is just one problem. That story is fake. Accounts from people who were physically with him that day paint a very different picture. On the morning of 9/11, Michael Jackson was asleep in his hotel room because he had no early meetings. His longtime friend and aide, Frank Cascio, has stated that he himself had a minor errand planned at the bank in the World Trade Center complex and overslept. But Michael had no such plans. More definitively, members of his security have explicitly labeled the Twin Towers meeting story as nothing more than an urban legend. Michael was awakened by a phone call from his security team telling him to turn on the television, and he watched the tragedy unfold like millions of others. His immediate concern was safety and logistics. That afternoon, he and his children were driven from the city to a friend's home in New Jersey. However, his actions in the following days reveal a practical kindness. Learning that international fans who had attended his concerts were now stranded and terrified in New York, he instructed his security team to stay behind and assist them. He later arranged and paid for a private bus to bring a group of these stranded fans from South America to the safety of his New Jersey location. That morning, life wasn't divided into heroes and victims. Everybody was a victim. It was up to timing. Because on September 11, 2001, the distance between life and death was only minutes. And for the people in this video, the difference between being inside the towers and being outside them was reduced to chance. Luckily, the King of Pop was still a long way from the World Trade Center, unlike our next figure, Seth MacFarlane, who was 10 minutes late to his own death. Love him or hate him, Seth MacFarlane has become one of the defining voices of the 21st century animation. His self-created series, Family Guy, first aired in 1999, and despite being cancelled twice, it survived and thrived into a pop culture institution. But if it weren't for a hangover, the show and everything that followed might never have existed. The night before September 11, 2001, while Michael Jackson was performing in New York, Seth MacFarlane was giving a lecture at the Rhode Island School of Design, where he had once been a student. Afterward, he joined faculty members at a local bar. Drinks turned into more drinks. He was scheduled to fly the next morning on American Airlines Flight 11, departing at 7:45 a.m.
Was hungover the next day,
Right.
and missed the flight. I got got to the counter and they said, I'm sorry, they just closed the gate, you're too late.
Wow.
It was close enough that he arrived at the airport while boarding was already underway. Too late. He rebooked the next flight out of town, assuming nothing more than a mild annoyance.
Went into the lounge, fell asleep, woke up about 45 minutes later to a commotion, and the first plane had hit, and sat there and watched the second plane hit, and they announced what flight it was, and I turned to the guy next to me and said, my God, that was the flight I was supposed to be on. I was late, I missed it.
In my opinion, ghosts don't come much closer than that. And MacFarlane wasn't the only Hollywood figure tied to 9/11. Mark Wahlberg later revealed that he, too, had been scheduled to board the flight. At the last minute, he and his friends changed plans, choosing instead to charter a private plane to a film festival in Toronto. Unlike MacFarlane, Wahlberg spoke publicly about the near misses. If I was on that plane with my kids, it wouldn't have gone down like it did. There would have been a lot of blood in the first class cabin. And then me saying, okay, we're going to land somewhere safely, don't worry. That comment sparked immediate backlash. Wahlberg later issued an apology. The next person is one I consider to be the luckiest pilot in the world, the almost captain of Flight 11. Steve Schaebner, better known today as Captain Steve, is a retired American Airlines pilot and a former US Navy aviator with more than 40 years of flying experience. In the recent years, he's become a familiar name online, educating aviation enthusiasts and everyday travelers alike about how flying really works. He even wrote a book titled Conquering Your Fear of Flying, a guide meant to calm anxious passengers. But on September 10th, 2001, fear wasn't anywhere on his mind. That afternoon, around 3 p.m., Schaebner sat down at his computer and logged into American Airlines system to check for unassigned flights the next day. And sure enough, there was one flight available.
It was American Airlines Flight 11 out of Boston's Logan Airport to Los Angeles. It was a 2-day trip, got back on the second day. Left, I think, at about, 7:40, 7:45 in the morning, something around that time frame. And I looked at it, and there was no pilot assigned to it yet.
As it so happened, Captain Steve was the only pilot available to take it. Before confirming the assignment, he spoke to his wife. He packed a bag, clean clothes, nothing unusual. After Steve's name had been penciled in for the flight, the pilot was expecting a final assignment via phone call. But the phone never rang. At first, Schaebner didn't think much of the delay, until later that night. What he didn't know was that around that time another pilot had logged into the system. Tom McGuinness, a senior pilot, was celebrating his birthday on September 10th with his family. On a whim, he decided to check the schedule and saw the Boston to Los Angeles flight. He also saw that someone else's name was already attached to it. So he called American Airlines.
Hey, just to check, am I legal to take this trip? In other words, can I bump Schaebner off the flight?
The answer was yes. With a few keystrokes, Steve Schaebner's name was erased. Tom McGuinness was assigned as the captain of Flight 11 on the morning of September 11th, 2001.
I still didn't realize that that was the flight that I was supposed to be on. I'm watching it on TV like everybody else, and it didn't click with me. When it finally clicked with me was later on that evening. I thought, I wonder who was on that flight. And so I did. I did what I did the day before on September 10th. I logged in, and when the screen came up in front of me, it looked exactly like it did the day before, except this time it had this trip sequence. My name wasn't there, and it said these 3 words: sequence failed continuity. That's code at the airlines for the trip never made it to its destination.
Unlike some celebrities who cheated death by chance, the next case shows how a celebrity saved a life on 9/11 without realizing it for years. In the wake of the tragedy, survivors began sharing their stories with missed trains and heavy traffic, leading some to narrowly escape the disaster. One such survivor is an accountant manager, Lara Lundstrom Clark. She claims an encounter with Hollywood star Gwyneth Paltrow caused her to be late for work at the World Trade Center, saving her from being in the second tower when it was struck by a plane. Gwyneth Paltrow is an American actress and a lifestyle entrepreneur, best known for starring in films like Shakespeare in Love, which won her an Oscar, Seven, and most recently in the movie Marty Supreme with Timothée Chalamet. Beyond acting, she's also a founder of a wellness brand and a major pop culture figure in the health and lifestyle space. Lara, who was employed at the Baseline Financial Services on the 77th floor of the second tower, was just 24 years old during the 9/11 terror attacks. She recounted how she was crossing 7th Avenue towards Christopher Street Station when a silver Mercedes SUV nearly hit her.
I stopped, and they screeched to a halt. Then it developed into one of those classic, who goes first situations. It got ridiculous. Then I made eye contact with the Mercedes driver. Oh my god, it was Gwyneth Paltrow.
Lara mentioned that Gwyneth gestured from across the street before she headed towards the subway station. She noted, at least if I was late for work, I had a story to tell. Racing to catch her train, Lara reached the platform just as the doors closed in her face, eerily mirroring Gwyneth's movie Sliding Doors. Unaware of the tragedy about to unfold, Lara admitted she was annoyed at everything that made her late that day, including Gwyneth Paltrow. When she finally arrived at the World Trade Center, the first aircraft had already struck, and officials directed her to return to the subway station. She described the scene as total chaos. Throughout the frightening ordeal, Lara said her thoughts turned only to her parents and what their fate would have been if she perished. Once authorities allowed people to exit the station, a police officer urged them to distance themselves from the towers. Lara remembered witnessing people leaping from the World Trade Center. Shortly after, a second aircraft crashed into her workplace. Miraculously, most of her colleagues survived the attack. Lara now attributes her survival to Gwyneth, stating, "If I had made that train, I would have been at my desk on the 77th floor of the World Trade Center." Like Lara, Joe Culity's account is a personal narrative of a near miss on the morning of September 11, 2001, distinguished by his presence at the World Trade Center Plaza and the rare, early photos he took following the attack. His story intertwines with the well-documented tragedy of Cantor Fitzgerald, the firm that suffered the single largest loss of life from the attacks. Culity worked in information technologies for the New York Mercantile Exchange. Due to the dispersed trading operations across Lower Manhattan, his IT duties involved system supporting activities in the World Trade Center complex. His primary office was in the World Financial Center, 1 North End Avenue, but his responsibilities plausibly extended to infrastructure within the Trade Center itself. The central contingent event of Culity's story is a scheduled early morning meeting at Cantor Fitzgerald's offices in the North Tower.
We're specifically reporting to 1 North End that day. That's where you were on your way to.
There was actually a meeting at number 1.
Oh, really?
Well, that's where I lost a lot of my friends. They were already up there.
Oh, geez.
I wasn't sure I was heading up there. I was basically going over to 1 North End to support them if there were questions and stuff.
Okay, and what floor on the WTC 1 would that be?
They were at Cantor Fitzgerald.
Oh, jeez.
However, at approximately 8:46 a.m., the moment American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower, Culity was underground in the World Trade Center PATH station.
And coming up from the PATH station in the basement to the ground level to walk across to 1 North End, the tower shook violently. Lights blinked off and on, the escalator stopped. Then the escalator started going, the lights came back on.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know what happened until I got up to the concourse level. Even then I was heading to the door and everybody was screaming and you saw flaming stuff coming down and landing, I guess it was in Church Street, across the street from the World Trade Center.
He then made his way up to the plaza, the central open area between the towers. There, he used a Nikon digital camera he routinely carried to capture photographs of the scene. These images are cited as some of the earliest plaza-level visual recordings from that morning. An important point that is relatively scarce in the broader photographic archive of 9/11. His described movements also align with the geography of known evacuation routes, including what is now memorized as the survivor's staircase, which provided an exit from the plaza to Vesey Street. Joe's story comes to show us that sometimes running late is not as bad and can save our lives. What is considered bad, however, is smoking, but on the tragic day of 9/11, it was a cigarette that saved Greer Epstein's life. Greer Epstein's story is one of the most striking personal survival accounts from September 11, 2001, defined by a split-second decision that defied her own routine. As an executive director for Morgan Stanley, Epstein was at her desk on the 67th floor of the South Tower that morning.
The brokerage firm Morgan Stanley. Some 3,500 employees resided within the World Trade Center. It was in fact the largest tenant in the World Trade Center, 3,700 employees across 20 floors. Many of those workers tonight remain unaccounted for.
Epstein arrived early, around 7:30 a.m., and attended to her normal work. Shortly before 9 a.m., she was scheduled for a meeting. Then approximately at 8:40 a.m., she received a phone call from a co-worker who suggested they step outside for a cigarette to discuss the upcoming meeting. That was a significant departure for Epstein, who later stated that she never took breaks before noon. Yet, this day, she agreed. During her elevator descent, she felt a sudden jolt, a shockwave from American Airlines Flight 11 striking the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Exiting into the plaza or street level, she was met with surreal chaos, people ducking, debris and flaming paper falling, and widespread confusion as everyone tried to process the attack on the first tower. She was now a witness outside her own workplace. A few minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. The impact zone, as documented in the official National Institute of Standards and Technology timeline, was between floor 77 and 85. While not a direct hit on her floor, the explosion and fireball ravaged the building's core and exterior. The colleague who had joined her for a cigarette also survived. Many others in her office did not. The power of Epstein's story lies in its terrifying simplicity. There was no heroic struggle or dramatic escape, just a minor, last-minute alteration to her daily habit. It highlights how fragile an architecture of an ordinary day can be and how destiny can hinge on the smallest of choices. None of these people made heroic choices. None of them saw it coming. They were late. They missed trains. They got bumped from a flight. They stepped outside for a cigarette. They argued in traffic for a second too long. And for the rest of their lives, they carried the weight of knowing how close they came. And that's the quiet terror of 9/11.